My name is Cleo Monago. I will be the facilitator of our discussion this evening. So, brothers, the theme is which way now for same gender loving Black men? I want you to understand that our goal is to inform our audience and to engage our audience at some point and to look at the state of this community now. So the first question I have for you, brothers, is from your perspective, what is the state of the same gender loving population? What condition are we in? How would you describe this community and its state at this point?
You know, it's kind of hard to really put a finger on it, especially right now during these times, because they're kind of some under duress times. So if I were to say quickly, just to leave time for, the other panelists, and then we can continue on the discussion, I would say there's a lot of fragmentation. There's a lot that's disjointed, possibly a lot that's not well organized at this time because we're fragmented in so many different facets. But I am hopeful that there is room, because I see a lot of room for growth and intersection and people coming together in the future.
It's a really hard question, and maybe it's because of the fragmentation that Dr. Melbranch just talked about, because I think that we're in a place where I think trying to develop sort of a identity that can fit into a lot of very different subcultures of the community, and that there sort of isn't sort of one, you go to one city and the kind of culture and community can be very different. And then even when you get inside of the community and you tend, and you have geographic and behind that you have a lot of generational diversity. I also think that we deal with all the ways in which visibility and our culture gets exported, and then how that sort of relationship to the outside world both informs and animates a lot of what then ends up happening, right? America can love aspects of our culture and hate us at the same time. And that can oftentimes have all sorts of impacts about the ability to come together inside of a hostile climate that is oftentimes creating all sorts of roadblocks to building. And then there are all sorts of ways inside of that, those sort of unhealthy structures and unhealthy pieces of sort of infrastructure that we have to then operate and live inside of. And so, it's a really hard question, but I do think that both the sort of fragmentation, the sort of ways in which the diversity of the community, and I think oftentimes the sort of ever expanding nature of our numbers and the changing climate of how we have to engage means that I think it's really evolving as well.
I have a question for you quickly, Rashad, to make sure that our diverse audience is real clear on what you're talking about. You mentioned exporting.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned something about other communities or kind of the vast states that we're in terms of our diversity. And I want people to understand when you talk about a hostile climate.
Yeah. When I talk about a hostile climate, I'm talking about all the ways in which, you can talk about, health pandemics that, all throughout the South and pockets of the South, right? And for instance, HIV and AIDS, but other diseases on top of that, health disparities that sort of are animated by public policy, by funding, the sort of lack of visibility we may have in places that are deeply hostile, right? If you think about if I just look at the numbers that Black people have in hostile states throughout the South, and then you can absolutely track that back to what the numbers would look like, if all of our numbers were as visible as they could be for Black same gender loving folks. I think that when I talk about a hostile climate, I'm talking about not a car accident. I'm talking about systems that were designed to make us invisible. And then once you're invisible or can never be visible, those systems collude to make life much harder for you. I hope I'm being clear, but
I asked you to break it down because I needed you to break it down.
Yeah.
And you broke down some things because one of the goals that I have is that we change the trajectory. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to get into all that yet, but I will be talking about that later at some point. but I want us to be very specific
Yeah.
when we talk about things, because we have inherited some really bad habits that you just described, which have gotten in the way of us as a collective winning. And as a result of us not winning, we have been losing, particularly lives, because there has not been a life-saving infrastructure that currently exists on a scale level and to hand over to the new generation so we can protect them, which is supposed to be part of our work from my perspective.
I'm worried deeply about our babies, our younger brothers who are in homes where they can't be fully themselves, or where they're otherwise subjected to abuse. We've spent a lot of time responding to calls, specifically addressing that in the last few weeks. And so, I struggle acknowledging that this week, Rashad and I had a call just yesterday. This week has been hellish. And this year, which feels like a decade already, has been really tough on us. That's hard, period, full stop. But in spite of all of that, right, each of us still get up every single day and do the work of trying to make sure that kids who look like us, that come from the communities that have conspired for our success, don't have to deal with the same challenges that we face.
Yeah, I wanted to say too, to kind of go on what David was just saying. I think, for a lot of us, it is focused on a lot of the identity of Black same gender loving communities is told from a deficits perspective, and particularly around HIV. So we start with HIV and then track back. So we don't look at ourselves as holistic figures. And we have internalized that, Cleo, exactly like you said. Proud same gender loving men, also belonging to fraternities, and kind of resetting the narrative about how that looks. Rather, back in the day where it was like the fraternities were saying, well, our brothers aren't same gender loving. And now they're very open about being same gender loving. And yes, there are going to be some problems with some of the fraternities, yes, but still they can exist in those spaces. And you're seeing a lot of things moving that do give me some hope. But I think moving forward, we have to move from a more assets-based approach instead of the internalization that I think Rashad was talking about, where we're starting negative because we've been, knocked down and kicked upon and people having foot on our necks for so long, but starting off on a more positive note.
Is it that concern about being hopeful that has you mentioning hope so much? And let me finish before you answer that. And let me tell you why I'm asking that. Because you started off talking about fragmentation and things being disjointed and not organized, which, without getting into all the data, I've been hearing since the 90s. Whenever I ask this population, what do they think about this population, and without fail, and it happened again in this conversation, fragmented, disjointed, and not organized, among other words, which I'll talk about later maybe, always starts off the list. And then everybody wants to get hopeful. Mm-hmm. And I think being hopeful is, it's a good thing. Mm-hmm. Shaw, and in the case I misquote you, as I paraphrase, feel free to correct me. Shaw said something about the term I use in the guidance is us eating our own, and us doing things behaviorally that sabotage and disrupt the capacity to grow and become successful as a collective. Nothing, and you know this as a doctor, David, can be resolved nothing can be healed without first controlling the infection. You can't, if you pour hope on it without treating it, you're gonna have a hopeful infection as opposed to a change in the situation. What I want us to talk about more, and I think that you and Rashad did this to a good extent, is the state that we're in. Because I need us to talk about that with a little bit more. Not Rashad, I think, kind of tied it all up, but I want your perspectives of this phenomenon as well in terms of where we are. I don't want to hear about these other good things that are happening out there in the silos yet. These wonderful silos. Mm-hmm. Gabrielle, I think, was the one who mentioned, I'm not sure it was at this past moment or in a previous conversation about an organization. Yeah, it was in a conversation we had before we went on air about a person in Hollywood who has built this big conglomerate, and it has real estate and has all these things. And it's now really hooking up that community, particularly people that look like that community. And we don't have nothing like that.
Right.
And some of the things that we might have something like that in the realm in which we do our work, but what's happening for same-gender loving people often starts off with, we're fragmented, we're disjointed, we're not organized. And I don't want to run from that yet, because something has to be done about that if people like Nigel Shelby are to not be so much at risk and reach out instead of committing suicide and have nothing to reach for that they can rely on. We have to do something about that. And well, that's all I'll say.
Well, I was going to say, I think that it is still very important that we have a sort of national advocacy approach and national advocacy platforms, especially when it comes to the exchanges of ideas and the exchanges of stories and experiences, which many times informs our local work. And I know for me, for many years, I straddled between, I loved being local. I loved just being a local CEO of a local nonprofit organization. And then I recognized that, in order for me to gain access to resources, in order to be able to move outside of the bubble of my community, which has historically been under-resourced and disenfranchised as a kind of a subsidiary region within the state. And majority of the money in California is going to San Francisco, San Diego, and Los Angeles. So little kind of rural suburban communities out there, especially poor Black, poor brown, poor migrant communities. I had to think outside of that. But I think now that I'm at a different place now, particularly with COVID-19, I'm recognizing that if we want to see change, right? If we want to see actual, real physical impact, like the one that we referred to in Hollywood, Cleo, if we really want to see that, it is done brick by brick. And at least that has been my approach. And it has been my laying a brick for 15 years in this small, middle of nowhere kind of county. And, you look up 15 years later and you have a little something. And so I guess the recommendation, a call to action that I would give on that is, how do we begin to still maintain this national advocacy movement, but to recognize that it is going to take a strategic investment in local kind of implementation, and we change things one community at a time, and that could be many at a time, but it's one moment at a time is where we should focus. And I don't know what that looks like. It's just an open-ended question.
Well, since time is limited, I'm going to just ask another question.
Wait, Cleo, before you do that, I want to respond to the last question, because I heard you say that we didn't fully engage in what you wanted us to engage in, which was talking about the state of our community, in particular the fragmentation. So
or whatever comes to your mind. That's what I agree with David, but that's what David Branch said. And so
yeah, I think that's right, but I also think that context matters. And so the thing that I'm struggling with is there's not a single community that I can think of in this moment that doesn't struggle with everything that we've named thus far, right? Where there isn't tribalism or challenges with public representations and agreements on them, or the things that naturally happen when you take into account diversity.
Let me ask you a question, and others can respond to this too if you like. And I got to paraphrase because I can't remember people's thoughts verbatim, but you mentioned when you first shared your thoughts that other communities struggle with diversity and multiple agendas within a group that can create different types of conversations that aren't necessarily smooth, but they're doing better than this community. Let me finish, because that might be provocative for people. Getting back to HIV, just to make a contrasting point. Black women who deal with a huge amount of oppression and objectification and dehumanization in this culture have been able to successfully, compared to Black men, manage the HIV issue. So what I want to unpack is what is getting in the way of us having independent success on managing this issue. I ain't talking about what the pharmaceutical companies are doing now with PrEP, which came to the rescue if your body can handle it, which is having finally some impact on some reducing incidents in terms of transmission. But independently, Black women before PrEP, Asians and Latino other communities, and white folks before PrEP had regardless of the tribal differences they have as well in their communities that you brought up, David, John, had some success at, relatively speaking, managing this issue. So what I want us to unpack is so we can get it out of the way, if we can, what's getting in the way of us having those kind of successes, though we're not the only communities that's dealing with diversity.
Well, I'm just going to push back slightly on a couple of the premises you made. And you made a premise around Black women being able to manage the HIV issue better than men. And I will say that is not, I don't think that is quite accurate for everyone's lived experience, particularly as with the newest release of PrEP under Descovy didn't even have really any women enrolled in the trial, and as a result is not accessible to women, and that's a crippling prevention tool. And I've been in the field not as long as everyone on the panel, but I have been around long enough to at least have seen that for the last 10 years, whenever I see someone who is in charge of a room, it is almost always a man. And when it's a room that pertains to Black same-gender loving men or Black queer men or Black bisexual men, it is often led by a Black man. Now, that may not be all the way at the highest levels, like the CDC director, right? But I do want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of where our power is and where it is not, so that we can be very strategic and where we can make better investments, where we need to elevate each other more, maybe where we need to hold government more accountable. But to say that we haven't had it under control, there's a lot of people that have done a lot of work towards this. And I think where we're not in control is the many inequities and the many problematic, racist, oppressive, and homophobic system that's just pervasive in the DNA of America. And I think that's where we see the disparities of Black same-gender loving men show up.
Gabrielle, hold on just a second, please. And Rashad, I see that you have something to say and I want to hear it, but I want to contextualize my comments, which still might be considered incorrect. But I was talking statistically, not necessarily in what you were talking about, that Black men have been disproportionately impacted and are still the most disproportionately impacted group when it comes to HIV in the world, in the United States. And among women, Black women are the most impacted, but women have had some reduction in incidences of HIV transmission that men have not been able to celebrate. So I'm talking about those kind of statistics.
That's just hard because nobody wins when we play the oppression Olympics. The reality is that both.
Not an oppression Olympics.
No, I'm just saying in terms of the marginal increases that Black cis hetero women have had, they are still more disproportionately impacted than any other group of women based on race and ethnicity, right? So I think that the only point, not the only, but the point that I made, and I think that Gabe is double tapping on, is that the diversity that exists in our community, that also exists in every other community, is a challenge to the kind of unification that you're describing. I think Gabe's other point about locating power and our attempts to name some of the spaces where we do have power and what some of our brothers are claiming power publicly is one of the ways in which we continue to respond to that underlying challenge.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You trying to say
something? I think so. I was really trying to build off of what the doctor was saying in terms of the sort of the fractured nature, and sort of talk about how that then impacts our ability to win both written and unwritten rules, right? From a policy standpoint, how that the sort of infrastructure challenges then make for an incredibly hostile climate, which I think everyone is sort of saying in different ways. And I will be the first one to celebrate all of the incredible achievements of the folks that were listed, many of whom I know personally and think of as friends, and others I'm just a fan of. And we have to recognize that we can't mistake our presence for power. And this is a trick of white supremacy, right? That Black faces in high places can make us confused about the numbers, right? And then we can see us achieving in one place and then look at the disparities, right? I you know, I love President Obama, even though I was outside protesting sometimes. I take him any day of the week and twice on Sunday right now. And, you know, black, white wealth income went the other way during those years. You know, there were a whole set of ways in which when we mistake presence for power, we can think that a Black president means the end of structural racism. We can celebrate, and this is the trick, right? It's the trick of, like, you know, we put a lot of faces up during Black History Month each day, and that's important because we need to have hopeful aspiration and conversations. But when we allow that to lead the entire strategy, we accept charitable solutions to structural problems. We accept mentorship and celebration over rule change. We accept water bottles to Flint instead of cleaning up the pipes. Celebrate, you know, cleanup days at inner city schools instead of changing public education. And so all I was really trying to get at really was the sort of the sort of nature of how hypervisibility, right? How America loving our culture and hating us at the same time can work absolutely together. And so that some of us can get really far, right? And then when I wake up each day and get the numbers on public policy and look at where I have to fight, I see all the ways in which I see the sort of the gains going the other way.
I will go to my grave knowing that Nigel Shelby would not have died by suicide if he had the opportunity to witness this. If he knew that there were us in the world, that we existed, it would have been enough to give him the strength to endure the bullshit that all of us have had to endure in order to get to this point, literally right now. And we can argue about strategy and the ways that some people fail us publicly, or right now there's a very active discussion going on in the Facebook chat about our diversity and representation. And we can do that, but I don't ever want to mistake for a second that us taking up space publicly matters in tremendously profound ways.
I want to mention something here. First of all, let me say something that I didn't say earlier, which I want to make clear now. Anything that I say that's not clear or that there's challenge, please do that. But also make sure that we understand what each other is saying. As I said earlier, my comments, and I didn't use the word statistics probably, which would have been helpful, was talking about the statistically in terms of epidemiological transmission, et cetera, when it comes to HIV, Black men are doing the worst, including worse than Black women in terms of prevention. But this is one of my standpoints here. I'm the oldest guy here, probably by a long shot. I've never been drunk or high or none of that in my entire life. I've been fully present, observant, listening, engaged, concerned about this community all of my life. And I've watched it before I was around and had all my pubic hair when there was no such thing as HIV and AIDS. I was around when Black people didn't call themselves gay, didn't even use the term. When we were family, one of the children in the life, et cetera. And gay wasn't even on the linguistic radar in terms of self-reference. And I've been fully observant in watching and doing some work, but typically outside of the hegemonic realm or white realms, which I consider LGBTQ a white realm. I've been doing work from inside of a Black cultural perspective with intentionality around building bridges between Black people and getting same-gender loving people to understand that we are part of the Black collective and we need to be operating in relationship with other Black people because Black struggle is our struggle. That's not a gay paradigm. So, but it's the paradigm I've been operating in. But from that perspective, I've been watching this community closely for years. And I've been asking the community questions about the state of it for years. And as I said earlier, it was Dr. Milbranch who first started talking about fragmentation, et cetera. And I wrote it, I made a note because damn, it's like he was at all the meetings for the past 30 years because that always comes up. One of the things that I hope occurs in this conversation between us and others, hopefully, who may come along if indeed we continue to build on something here, is a deconstruction of where we are, why we are where we are, so we can make informed decisions to advance past any state of challenge. Now, before you consider answering that question, and at risk of getting in your nerves, I know that there's individuals doing stuff. We have a huge siloic mosaic of people doing things, but the young people who constantly are reaching out to me talk about, and some of them live in big, huge cities like LA, New York, Washington, DC, Atlanta, Georgia. They feel like they have no community. They feel like they have no emotionally safe space. They feel like they have no reliable institutions. They feel like they don't have any concrete reasons except for their own imagination to feel proud of what they are. And the issue of mental illness, HIV, now we have a meth issue, which Michael Rice is going to talk about with some detail because he made a brilliant film on this issue, which is one of the reasons why he's in this meeting. We have all these issues that are rising, including suicide, that we have not yet created at scale enough response to be a preventative community, including from a political perspective. So before we can actually do that, we have to be able to unpack why we are where we are, which is why the title of the discussion is We're Now for Same Gender Living People. And we still are challenged more than any group in the country, including compared to Black women, with this issue. But I don't want this to be an HIV discussion. I want this to be a discussion that looks at the underpinnings that have led to, in my opinion, a lack of scale response to affirming our generation, including the next generation. And from my perspective, to get there, we have to look at some of the things that Rashad brought up very early in this conversation, in terms of how we do or don't work with each other and how we interact with each other. So my question, now unless people have any pushback to what I just said, is two things. And I'd like you to bear with me and try to do this two ways so we can go from A to B. What are the challenges that we face? And what are the solutions to those particular challenges that you're going to highlight?
It's challenging enough to talk about how people identify as Black and what Black means to everybody and the diversity within there. And then when you talk about being same gender loving, being the people that really cling tight to the word gay and want to hold on to that gay identity, which a lot of us have talked about a lot. And then the whole diversity in between with queer and different terms that people use, it's really challenging to get people under the same rubric and say, okay, look, this is what we need to do moving forward. So I do think we have to start on a small level and also keep the bigger picture in mind, but I'll let it go to the other panelists because I know they may have, especially Rashad may have some more broad sweeping solutions or proposed solutions that could be helpful.
Rashad?
I mean, look, thanks for that.
I didn't mean to throw you.
I'm sorry, Rashad. You're supposed to duck it.
Yeah.
Like this. So Rashad is going to give us our solutions.
So there's a space between always having to celebrate or always having to attack, right? And I think that's what we sometimes lack is like that middle ground of being in healthy conflict, in healthy disagreement, in healthy challenge with one another. If we're not celebrating our achievements, then we are like reading each other online or doing subtle, shady attacks. And you know, like we want, and then maybe pretend sometimes that it's not happening or say, no, we shouldn't talk about that. But that in-between space of a community that all wants the same thing, but we may sometimes see different paths to getting there, that we may kind of can sometimes look at each other and give each other the benefit of the doubt on the pathway towards something to change. I think like that is the thing that we have to work at, and that's not easy to do. And so I appreciate this conversation. I also appreciate you trying to pull out conflict here, because I do think that like there is conflict, there is disagreement on path forward, and in order to like have healthy wins and have continued progress, we have to meet these moments not just with praise or just with kind of, distrust or mistrust, but in that middle ground of listening and learning.
I have to just say my three things are, the problem, Cleo, to your point, is that we don't have safe spaces, right? Like there are few physical safe spaces for Black same gender loving men to gather, right? Like we don't disclose data, right? Like I talked earlier about the policy problems around anti-discrimination policies. There just are few safe spaces. It's why in part people look to Black Men's Exchange to be able to curate things like this. There also is, I don't know that there has been an attempt to define or create an SGL community, right? All of us opt into it based on how we identify and show up in the world, but that could be both a problem and a solution, right? And then the last one, I think, is that, again, for me, this is a slight pivot, but for me, it goes back to some of the earlier points about mental health and isolation and our trauma, but there are so few examples of Black gay love that exist in the world, right? It's one of the things that I've always said and talked to G so much about in the way that he's shown up in the world in his partnership with Juan. But that also affects us. I think it affects how it is that we think about ourselves and masculinity. I think it also affects how it is that we show up in both intimate and in platonic relationship with each other. So those are my three things.
I want to invite us to actually understand that we sometimes have a hard time listening to each other and intentionally collaborating. And the lack of intentionality around the importance of collaboration feeds into the fragmentation that David Melbranch mentioned earlier and the disorganization. And I do have some more things to say about that, but I just want to put out there that we listen to each other because, like I said in the guidance or someplace recently, some of us know of each other, but we don't know each other. And part of the brick, if you will, the process or strategic brick is for people who have some influence among us to collaborate. So what Gabriel can offer in what he calls this little world, which is a whole lot. I mean, he offers huge things in that world that's bigger than a lot of other people's world and other parts of the world. But the bottom line is that we do have the capacity to do anything. And we do have the capacity to give our community what it needs at scale. But we have to address some of the issues that Rashad first brought up regarding how we treat each other. And I think sometimes how we mistreat each other is the ironic lack of compassion, because we have so much in common in terms of what we all struggle with as same gender loving Black men in the society.
A lot of these conversations, Cleo, you and I have had before, and I'm sure you have had a lot of these conversations with all the brothers that's on the panel here. But I hate to be the Ayala of the group, but I really feel like, in talking about the fragmentation and the silos and, even going back to the Renaissance that's going on right now. And I just feel like there's, just to piggyback, a lot of separation amongst us. I feel like a lot of that is just rooted in unhealed pain and hurt that many of us have had to grow up with, that we've never recovered from. Even many of us, who are possibly on this panel, or many of us who are part of the Renaissance movement, many of us who are making it to these high spaces, if you will, in the influential circles that, we say we need to be in, we still walk around with a lack of self-awareness about the unhealed hurt that we have, that I believe causes us to not fully support one another and work together, and which is why you have all of these silos, which is why you have what's going on in the comment section right now, which I haven't seen, but it goes on in the comment section all day long on social media, where it's a continuous trying to, point out the fault in the next person because of the lack of self-reflection, I believe. I really don't know what the answer is, especially when you walk around with a community that lacks a lot of self-awareness about that internal pain that we have that we have yet to heal. But I think the solution to it is to work on that unhealed hurt. I mean, and I think just listening this past hour, of everything that you guys are talking about when it comes to policies and all of those things that I don't really, kind of go over my head. At the end of the day, I really feel like that's the root of it.
The first hour of the conversation was a great opportunity to glean some insights from the professionals, I call them, in the community, because I really haven't personally taken a deep dive into some of the inner workings of HIV/AIDS and how that affects our community. I really attack my work from the perspective of us knowing our history, us knowing where we are, us being seen in media, us having safe spaces. I think I met Cleo at a community event in the basement of a hospital. Is that right, Cleo? Yeah.
You said basement.
Yeah, it was a basement of a hospital. So that's usually my focus. So it was great to kind of see you all engage in that first half of the conversation.
When talking about the current state of Black same gender loving people, I like to refer to it as people or population or group, because I look at communities. When I use that word, I really want to be intentional about it. Communities are intentional. They have some form of autonomy. They have resources. Black people, SGL Black people, just like most Black people, live where we can, for the most part, and don't control much about our surroundings and our environment. So I'm not quick to call Black people Black communities, Black populations and Black subpopulations. But as far as the current state of the people, I see it as a very dire state. And one of the main reasons I see that is because there is little to nothing in the way of institutions that are rooted, in Blackness, or institutions that are, come from a culturally affirmed perspective, coming from a Black perspective. What we have is we have a lot of opportunities for whiteness to come in and control things. Everything is from a white perspective, which is the LGBTQ, whole phenomenon. It comes from that. So what we deal with when we're talking about, healing from past trauma, when we're talking about interacting with each other, when we're talking about, anything that happens consciously and subconsciously that gets in the way of building progress, it goes back to that questioning one's worth. And it happens with Black people in general, but it hits Black SGL people, it hits a little hard, because there still is that cultural attachment, that very visible cultural attachment to whiteness. And then there is the facade or the fake shield that it provides, or the illusion of a shield that it provides. But yet that rainbow shield or that LGBTQ shield is not protecting anyone. It's just making people think that they're affirmed, making people think that they're protected. Meanwhile, we don't own nothing, we don't control nothing, we can't protect nothing.
I really see where you're coming from when you're talking about we don't own anything. Like currently in New York City, we used to have a lot of clubs, a lot of social places where people can gather, familiarize themselves with other people in the community. And because we don't own a lot of the clubs, we don't own a lot of certain restaurants that were frequently patroned by gay folks, Black gay folks and brown gay folks, it's kind of lacked in our social expansion, and getting to see each other and having a place to congregate, because a lot of these places are owned by white owners. And, a lot of Black and brown gay club promoters and people who own certain networks that can create community houses for a lot of our young kids to come together are not there. And if it's not like that in New York City, I can just imagine how it may be in other places of the United States. I think our state of coming together and having self-realization when it comes to worth and value is very crucial. Earlier, Cleo spoke about the film Party Boy and what impact it has had. When I seen that crystal meth was starting to inundate our community, And not only was it inundating our community, but it was also having an effect with people who are HIV positive, not wanting to take their medications because a lot of them were either high or have overdosed on crystal meth. That became a huge issue. And when it came to one of my friends overdosing from that drug, as an artist and as a director, I took it upon myself to create a piece of art that people can see ourselves, and maybe we can start creating safe spaces and start talking about the issue. I've been really successful in the process. Unfortunately, in the process, I've probably had less than 10 people of color who run organizations that really wanted to work with me. And majority of the people who have worked with me or who wanted to do publicity regarding this film and regarding bringing crystal meth to the forefront, especially within our social media culture, within our pop culture, have been white people. And that's kind of tormented me a little bit, because at first I really couldn't understand, why is it that, you know, we have something that's happening to our community. In the film, I'm not just talking about crystal meth, but I'm talking about HIV infection, and I'm talking about the history of where we come from. I think this is one of the first films where I saw, well, that I've curated, that I saw a historical timeline from turn of the century all the way up to present day, dealing with Black and brown queer folks. And I tell people all the time, I said, finding self-worth, finding self-value is really hard in our community from the post-traumatic stress that we have endured just in our earlier years, our adolescence. I mean, I tell people all the time, there's three main aspects of are three institutions that we use to really cultivate who we are. One of them is family, church, and the institution of school. And so when you have your family saying that, you know, we'll disown you, and because you are gay and you have nowhere to go, no support, what does that do to a person? When you talk about the institution of school saying that statistically, you will have HIV by the time you are 25 years old if you're a Black or brown man. What does that do to a person socially and internally when they're trying to familiarize themselves with their peers? And lastly, when you talk about the church, which a lot of the Black community is affiliated with the Black church, because it's always been a beacon that we have turned to in times of crisis or times of not knowing or the unknown. What do you do when you are raised up in the church and they tell you that you are the antithesis to God, that you are an abomination? Now you deal with all that, and then you still trying to grow into a young man, then to be a Black or brown young man into the community. You are dealing with post-traumatic stress alone out the gate, even more so than I think some of our cisgender heterosexual peers.
What you bringing up, brother, is a conversation that I think has to be had before really moving forward almost on anything, because a lot of what we see is a result from a disconnection from overall black people and overall Black culture. The mere fact that we're seeing an epidemic among Black SGL men with a drug that has traditionally been used by white people and has not really affected the rest of the Black population in the same way, that is an indicator of a certain disconnect that's happening. That the conversation needs to happen in order to build those bridges and in order to really create a cultural foundation for us to stand on. But I'm glad you brought that up.
Thanks, Kashama. Let's hear from Guiga real quick. What's up in Brazil, Guiga? Black folks.
Yes. So, well, first of all, same gender loving is not a name used in Brazil to describe homosexual males of African ancestry. And it's, as I'm listening to you all, I was thinking, to which extent can I actually contribute to it? Once the scenery here is so different in so many ways. And in some ways, it feels like we are just starting or getting somewhere, and in some other places it seems like we are way we have gathered other things from behind that you have left behind, you know. Like, for instance, what I'm trying to say is, it's not like we have this sense of community where we can tackle our community. Besides, I mean, where we can have this conversation among other people that are not activists and talk about our community as if it were something actually amidst the rest of the country. On the other hand, it is for a fact that we have enough of an ancestry that connects us to our African roots, where homosexual males and the LGBTQ community, we feel somehow embraced by. So it is not the same as dealing with the church, the Christian church in the US. And I was listening to you saying, to you all saying, like, we don't own anything, and the issues we have with organizing ourselves. Like, I wish we were at the point where we were organizing ourselves as much as we were like 15 years ago. 15 years ago, when I first engaged into what could be called a civil rights movement for Black people in Brazil, I could notice a sense of an urge to organize, to gather people together for us to put our 2 cents in whatever policies were being promoted or formulated. Nowadays, we are facing a whole complete different scenario. It's mostly dictatorship knocking at my door. You know, the way the forces of the federal government are behaving nowadays is just,
I think we have that
inexcusable.
in the midst of your comments that same-gender living people, to some extent and in some contexts, are embraced by the culture.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. In what sense? Like, it is.
I heard you right when I heard you say something like that. Because I mean, I go to Brazil, and I met you and been to Brazil and hung out with you in Brazil, so I have some understanding of what's happening in Brazil. But I think what I want to talk about, if you don't mind, is culture, or what Gabriel Maldonado knows as cultura, and talk about the relevance of that to part of solutions. But before I do that, I have a question for the panel. One of the things that I do professionally is provide mental health therapy to people, families, couples, individuals. And I have counseled white homosexual people, and I'm talking about homosexuals now because of our focus. I go beyond that, of course, but I'm being contextual here. I've counseled white homosexual men who've been put out by their mother and their father, who have been displaced, who are in runaway shelters. I've talked to Latino and Asian, and of course, Black, same-gender living young people who are rejected from their families and dealing with different issues. But it's not the way to start this, at the risk of being provocative. These people, except for the Black people, despite those challenges, ultimately do feel like they have some place to go that has scale to deal with their challenges. My question to the panel is, despite their diversity, Latinos, Asians, et cetera, and what they deal with, despite that there's definitely people within all those cultures who don't approve of same-gender living people or homosexual people, these people still have been able to build things for themselves to nurture their community. What are the steps from your perspective, or the elements from your perspective, that need to be in place for us to have the same thing? What are the elements that need to be in place for us to have a reliable source of community, of affirmation, health and well-being, self-conceptual health for our community?
Well, I'll offer up my
Go on, Adam.
the first step, and we can go from there. I think skilled leadership within the community is a great first step. and I think Cleo and I talk about this all the time. Real skilled leadership. I think oftentimes we have a lot of folks leading in the community that just don't have it. And if we can obtain and retain skilled leaders, that's a great first step.
Anyone else?
I definitely agree with Adam when it comes to addressing leadership. We really have to analyze leadership, because much of our leadership come organically from us as a people. It's been rather placed in front of us for various reasons, and it hasn't been effective. And many times Black people who are placed in leadership by white people to be ineffective, they don't know that they've been placed for that specific strategic reason. So I think that there's a lot of critical thinking that has to go along with our leadership. There's political education that needs to happen on a massive level with Black people in general, but especially with Black people who are identified and aligned with, a white political concept such as like LGBT. And even when it comes to those who don't identify as that, or SGL, there are still, residue of colonial trauma that needs to be unpacked. So that needs to happen on a massive level before we can move forward. Other than that, we're just going to be going in a lot of circles and dealing with the same thing over and over again.
Anyone else?
I think Black creatives coming together, and I think Adam would agree with me on this. Black creators come together and commissioning artistic projects where we can see ourselves in our totality. Because right now I'm a true believer that the arts will save the world. And what I mean by that is that, especially when you look at, your Gen Z demographic, the millennial demographic on up to Generation X, to the baby boomers, everyone has the agreements of music, of theater, of arts, now dealing in the year 2020, social media. So I really believe having an element of the arts and Black creatives coming together and say, let's express ourselves, just like how you see Lena Waithe coming up, and just like how you see Issa Rae and so many other, our heterosexual brothers and sisters. They're creating this Black mantra for our community, and you see our heterosexual brothers and sisters who are of a certain age demographic coming to life. It's like a renaissance. It's like an awakening. Well, I think the same thing can happen with our community. I think the SGL community, the gay community can come together, commission multiple projects, and it's gonna take people to get on one page, but multiple projects so people can see themselves. What's the one thing that we hold every day is this: our phones. We're looking at it nonstop throughout the day. What can we do to show to show who we are then through the arts? So I believe that the arts should be something that could help and aid in this.
Well, Brother Rice,
I am with Rice in this. I am with Rice in this 100%. I think that the arts are actually a way in which, a tool in which we can get to a common ground of strength. One of the things that Candlelight does for the newcomers is they identify you as someone of strength who is coming to the code, to this African oriented thing, as someone who has a lot to bring, and we share a common ground of strength. Yes, you have a lot to learn. Yes, there will be flaws, but it is okay for you to be where you are, and we share something in common. And I believe the arts have this potential. This is also this has also been the responsible here in Brazil, in the capital of Brazil, for bringing back Black people together. The cultural producers, the female cultural producers who have brought attractions to Brasilia, Black attractions to Brasilia, and this has fed into a fad of young people who identify themselves first of all as Black, then as possibly gay, and then possibly out of the curve of this shit called being gay. Sorry for the use of words.
Well, one thing I think we have to be careful of too, Brother Rice, as well as you, great
Giga.
the brother from Brazil. When we're talking about the arts, I think we have to be careful though, because the arts are so right now from in the perspective in which we consume it, coming from mainstream white culture. You brought up like Issa Rae and Insecure, I believe. And like that's a show that while it shows beautiful black people, you know, kissing on each other, having fun in very interesting scenarios, you know, I can see how it's relatable in a lot of ways by black, you know, 30 somethings, us older millennials, but it doesn't do so much good for the black psyche when you look at the language of it, when you look at the dynamics of how these black people are interacting with each other sometimes. It more so just kind of puts our own shit back in our face pretty much. Sometimes with the arts that we do see. And sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it's the shit that white people have created to throw in our faces about us. So I think we have to be really careful about that and be very strategic and make sure that we are controlling our artistic mediums and controlling our narratives, because it's so easy to get caught up in coded white supremacy that goes over the airways and over the apps that we stream our entertainment from. But I do agree with you that arts is a powerful tool.
Right. No, and that's why I was saying commissioned, something that's strategically laid out for the purpose of us enhancing ourselves, you know, and not to say that we can ever talk about having a literature piece, where it could talk about a young man in Brazil that's black, or a black man in Mexico or in Toronto or in Ohio that's black and he's dealing with crystal meth addiction, or he's dealing with a young Jamaican boy who lives in Flatbush, Brooklyn, and he's dealing with being homeless because his people put him out. Those could be seen as negative things, but I think in commissioning works of art, we would also show the flip side that yes, this happens to us, but how can we be steadfast? I know David didn't say he'd like the word resilient, but how can we be steadfast in making sure that we progress? And I think creating a body of art that can reflect that through social media, through theater, through literature, and through music, and we get artists to come together and we find a time, let's get ready to put this out. Let's show ourselves in a positive light. Let's show ourselves overcoming obstacles that we've all talked about before, but probably never visually seen it before. And that's the reason why I think Party Boy, the documentary about crystal meth addiction within queer communities of color, has taken off, because a lot of us have never seen it in our face in a theatrical setting. You know, so I think commissioning pieces that are particularly engaging all those aspects of social media, theater, literature, and music could really do good for, you know, the culture.
But though it's taken off, Michael, you also mentioned that you've been having a hard time getting that many black people to get behind and feature the work. I want to keep that in mind, because that's important. Also, someone said that there used to be these spaces, these identified black people who are no longer there. I think you said that also, Michael. And Rashad said something earlier, and I got to paraphrase, Shad, I'm not as articulate as you. You said that sometimes the representation is not necessarily from a perspective of being helpful to black people, but to have a black face there to give the image of inclusion. And those are powerful weapons that are used to keep black people in a state of paralysis and staying at step one and never going on to a place of actual power. Since time is getting towards, I have some things that I'm going to ask you all, and that I'm going to share with you. What the clients that I have who are not black have in common, no matter what they're going through with each other, is cultural cohesion. Anybody know what I mean by cultural cohesion? Rashad, do you know what I mean by cultural?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cohesion, cultural cohesion. Very, yes. Like
it sounds like it's okay. Well,
yes, I mean
that is so rare among us. I have to reiterate the concept to make sure we know what it means, because we don't practice it.
Well, we also may not have it, right? Like when your people, when you all can point back to a place where you all came from, and you point back to histories and shared, and when white supremacy has broken down and a whole set of structures has broken down a shared culture, and then giving us a culture, giving us a religion, giving us a language, giving us names, you know, a whole set of things. To just, so yes, I'm not saying that we don't have cultural cohesion, but I think it's
been interrupted.
I like to make sure the story is complicated, not just about what we don't do and what we don't have, versus all the ways in which forces have colluded to ensure that Black people's being culturally cohesive is one of the most dangerous things for white America.
And that's an extremely important point, Rochelle, because often when I hear Black people complain about Black dysfunction, it's not parallel to the cause. We don't look at cause and effect. We also don't go back to the fact that we used to be quite industrious and build communities that were very successful that were literally and purposely destroyed because people, I think Trump is in the White House in a more modern reaction to Black people being someplace that implies that white supremacy is not so supreme, and that's puts a wrench into that mythology, and they have to put things back in place with a crazy white man because it was interrupted by the Obamas, just like Black Wall Street was interrupted by the people that burned it down, and we can go on and on. But I want us to understand that even us on this call here have something in common. We are Black, same-gender-loving men who have taken leadership in the world, who have the capacity to inspire levels of change, and who have inspired levels of change. There's power here, there's influence here. What's not necessarily here on a consistent enough basis is us working, in addition to everything else that we do that's important, on making sure that the next generation of us is not left hanging, building something for this community. But one of the things that's often missing from this work, and y'all can fight me later, or you can fight me now, but you probably want to go to sleep soon, is that we don't understand the importance of culture. And that's why I mentioned cultural cohesion. And even when people do not have cultural cohesion, they can create it. For example, queer, gay, lesbian, all that kind of stuff, which are as a group of linguistics for culture, are relatively 60 years old in terms of their use by the Western population. A lot of people that we're calling gay, like James Baldwin, he didn't identify as gay. But we look at things literally as I do, we know when there was a change in the trajectory in terms of self-concept. But the point I'm trying to make is that there's people who build culture for themselves so they can survive and do well and work collectively together. And we haven't done that enough. I want to mention SGL for a minute and the intentionality behind SGL, because I've never had a conversation with most of you regarding that, and I want to do that right now. The intention of Same Gender Loving is to have a paradigm for homosexual and bisexual, trans, etc. people that is actively considerate of the Black experience, that actively engages our history, cause and effect, and that's respectful of us as people of African descent at its core. Queer and LGBTQ is not. For example, Guigo mentioned that back in the day, there were more Black Brazilians who identified that way who are doing things, and now the white gays have pretty much taken over everything and are in the leadership of their paradigm. It's their paradigm. Things always trickle down into them leading it because lesbian from Greece, the word gay from gay parade in the whole European paradigm is theirs. So it always relapses into their control because it affirms them without any conflict. There's conflict among us around it because it doesn't necessarily affirm us. What's been called LGBT gay almost always is unstable because the foundation does not affirm us. I went to help G and work with G and a group of people, I forgot what year it was, G might help us remember, when they were doing walks around Atlanta to protest the racism against them in Atlanta and try to support, locating and supporting same-gender loving Black businesses who are being potentially ignored by Black people included, because some of us do know that we were raised to think that white people's water is wetter and their fire is better and what they do is better. And we unconsciously devalue what Black people come up with. Well, we cannot win if we don't find a culturally cohesive paradigm in which to psychically invest in with the intention to deflect the myth of our lack of value compared to somebody else, and simply learn to be autonomously affirmed as Black people who have to be same gender loving, et cetera. So the intentionality behind SGL is to do that, not just to be oppositional or anything at any of that. It's to teach us the importance of cultural cohesion, cultural affirmation, and loving ourselves in our own image, and building what we build with the explicit intention to affirm ourselves and repair ourselves as Black people. One of the things that this conversation started off acknowledging, it was Dr. Milbranch who did this, he didn't use these words, but the need for repair. You know, disorganization is a lack of repair issue. Fragmentation is a lack of repair issue. We need to work in concert to everything else we do is to repair the Black spirit and learning to love ourselves in our own image without question, without thinking twice. Now, of course, there's all kinds of approaches that we can consider, but I think that we should have not tonight, but we should have a critical conversation about problem solving and the power of cultural affirmation. Because as I said, when I mentioned my clients that are not Black that I work with, who tend to have places to go at scale to be affirmed, and we don't, is that they have more cultural cohesion than we do. And cultural cohesion does not mean they all get along and they all agree. When you go to Chinatown, people assume that Chinatown literally means Chinatown. No, it's Laotians there, there's Thai people there, there's people from Singapore there, but they've all agreed to affirm being Asian despite any differences, so the collective can win. I have a Black same-gender loving woman friend who, after Donald Trump became president, came to me crying because her white feminist lesbian friend voted for Trump. Her white lesbian feminist friend was compensating for feeling insecure about her worth under the realm of Barack Obama.
You could have just stopped.
And a white man said, you get to be white and you'll never be ignored again to its 99.9% audience. And it's lesbian, feminists, and all pussy grabbing problems. Fuck that. White, we want to be white, and we want to show up. So my point is that was cultural cohesion.
Mm-hmm.
Despite their differences, it was about seizing power for their collective.
Mm-hmm. But you know, Dr. Cleo, how do we get there, and how do we get people even interested enough to know what that is?
Through education.
It's sexy enough for people to get the masses involved to even want that for our community. Because I think one of the problems is you have these group of people that's interested in the cultural cohesion, like maybe people on this panel, but how do you get the majority, because I don't think we represent the majority, how do you get the majority interested enough to even start that healing?
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to propose that we have another conversation at some point about that, because we all have the tentacles to make significant impact. And I want to reiterate the power and the importance of loving ourselves in our own image, deflecting internalized white supremacy. Because see, one of the things that happened during the HIV/AIDS, Black HIV/AIDS industry period, was a lot of people who white people allowed to be in charge are the kind of people that Rashawn talked about conceptually. He didn't mention any individuals, but these were Black people who white people felt good about, who accommodated them, who were guaranteed not to move the needle from white supremacy myth to Black self-knowledge and actualization and power. They knew that they would create the perspective of inclusion by getting white accommodating Black people in place so Black people can feel represented. But the power gauge doesn't move because that Black person is more in love with white people any day than they are with Black people. And when white people had an HIV/AIDS problem that was kicking their butt, their leaders loved them. There was no confusion. There were no mixed messages. There was nobody questioning the value of white people. They valued them and they took care of them. They managed them and they were successful because they had cultural cohesion. They wouldn't even allow anybody to go against anything that wasn't going to result in them having success as a collective. And they've been quite successful. Despite, I'm just say this real quickly, David, and they're not one big happy family that gets along with each other. I don't think that the white lesbian feminists who voted for a pussy grabber agrees with pussy grabbing.
So that's my question, which is that do they have cultural cohesion, or do they not have to deal with the problem of race?
First of all, see, you can deal with the problem. Let me try to answer this way. There are Black immigrants, and there's statistical proof of this that you can look up right now on Google. Black immigrants do better in this country economically, and even in terms of education, than African Americans.
Right. They deal with
they look just like us.
Mm-hmm.
They have cultural,
but they're not dealing with the problem of race.
Yes, they are.
Not in the same way. They are not. They are not. The statistics also show that they come with a different level of socioeconomic resources. They also don't engage in the problems of racism in the ways that we do as Black Americans.
Yeah, but actually, the statistics say one other thing about
was not
really important. While they're the most educated and oftentimes the most successful because of white supremacy and how much more educated African immigrants have to be and how much more successful they have to be to actually get through the racist immigration process, African immigrants are actually the only group of immigrants up until recently that actually do worse generationally once they get here. Other groups do better when they get to America. African immigrants do worse. And so we're still having a conversation about white supremacy, about white structures, about power structures that we have to build power to dismantle. That doesn't change the fact that we actually have to have infrastructure to do that, which means we need alignment, we need political education, we need a goal that is collective and focused, but also we need to recognize that even African immigrants who may do better in some ways because they have they come with a totally different context around a connection to their culture, connection to resource, access to communities that haven't been broken down. White supremacy means that they have a much different relationship to the criminal justice system, to the health system, and to every other system in this country because the fact of the matter is they're Black.
Well, one thing I think we need to at least consider is that being Black does not have to be a problem when Black people have Black people's back. Being Black does not have to be a problem if we advocate for each other and have each other's back. One of the reasons why being Black can be difficult when people step out on a limb, as I've had many times, as I look back and it's a bunch of crickets because of the lack of us having each other's back, which gets to some of the cultural things. Again, I'm sorry for saying your name so much, Rashad, but you broke so much stuff down in your first comments regarding some of these dynamics. It's a good reference point in terms of why we have these conflicts. And I'm not just sitting here simply being theoretical. I know tons of Africans. I go to Africa all the time. I hang out in African communities right here in this country, Nigerian communities, Senegalese communities. I engage Black people actively as a part of how I live, Haitian communities. I'm in dialogue with these people and I know what their experiences are all over this country because I care about it and it's something that I engage. You can be Black, including African American, and do well in ways that don't compromise your integrity as a Black human being, particularly if you have collective cooperation with each other. You don't have to be a white ass kisser to do well on an individual basis, which means you lost on a collective basis. Because a bunch of successful Black millionaires who don't talk to each other are in silos of silence that does not benefit and trickle down to Black progress.
And that's why I was going to ask you. So what do you think we should do, especially when it comes to, I like to say, black SGL or just Black folks general gatekeepers? You know, I've been in rooms with people who have a lot of power, especially, well, I'm in the entertainment business, so that's what I know, having pitch meetings, having all kind of forums that I've been to where I've been in a room and sometimes only being the only other Black person and another person is Black and queer, and they will walk by you and not say a word. But you have everybody else trying to find a way to help you. So how do you how do we get a hold to them? Because to be honest and to be vulnerable with you guys, that's one of my biggest frustrations that I have had in the process of just working in entertainment in the past 10 years, was being in places with people of color that actually have some power and influence, but to get them to even talk to you, to make change, or for them to say, I don't familiarize myself with that problem, so that's not me. What do you say to that situation?
Well, we have 6 minutes. And that is a profoundly important question that you asked, and it needs to be answered. But it needs to be answered with some clarity and robustly, which you don't have time to get into, which is why I want to invite you guys to consider another conversation. But I do want to tell you a short story that's true, and I think part of what we're going to have to resolve. Back in the day, I was at a very famous Same Gender Loving. Nobody knew he was, a lot of us knew anyway, because we can see. But anyway, I was at this very famous Same Gender Loving Black man's home. I'm not saying who he is, but he's no longer with us. I'll just say that.
Shady.
No, that could be a lot of people, and I'm not shady. I am never shady.
Well, I know who it is, so there we go.
Right.
Okay, if you're psychic and SGL, cool. Anyway, David, well, some of you guys have heard of, had just given $1 gazillion to that organization, Gabrielle, that you and I talked about earlier before this conversation started. And I said to him, I was in his music room, and he was sitting at the piano. It was just me and him, and everybody else was. It was a Thanksgiving holiday dinner, and I said to him, I said, brother, you heard about what David just did, giving them people, those white homosexual people, $1 gazillion? You got $1 gazillion, and you're not going to be able to spend half this money, or less than half this money in your lifetime. It's going to be much shorter than you expected. But even if he lived a long life, he couldn't spend all this money. I said, why don't you consider doing that for our community? And he said, I don't feel safe to do that. He said that David Geffen didn't have to worry about his career going up in flames because he publicly gave a bunch of money to some people. I don't know if my community has the stability in my back enough for me to do that and it be seen as something good as opposed to now a reason to come at me. And I had to sit there and finish my grapes. I mean, I couldn't say, well, that's not true. I said, we need to work on building a safe space. Another thing, I can mention names this time. What's his name? The gospel singer who went to a youth event and said he wasn't homosexual no more.
Oh, you talking about
Tonax.
Well, anyway.
A lot of people.
Donnie McClurkin, yeah.
I'm about to say other names, right? I guess.
Y'all
gospel.
need to practice being decent, harmonious, loving, and inspirational brothers. Anyway, when he did what he did, people saying he need to shut up. You talking about, and they went off. People being vicious and doing what some of these people do with great aplomb, quite well, much more than me, supportive and affirming. And I told them, I said, how is he going to consider embracing himself if you create a hostile environment for him to not even consider loving himself? He's going to get more love in the church in terms of some type of church culture of them running to heaven through homosexual, whatever they're doing, then he's going to have outside in terms of coming into the community to have a place to be embraced, nurtured, repaired, and love himself and feel good about who he is. Where is that place at? What you're doing right now is part of what helps to create a culture of conflict and emotionally unsafeness, where people don't learn to love themselves in their own image because they can't see their own image reflected on a large enough scale to consider embracing who they are. So I want us to consider, at least on a trial basis, because it won't be a life sentence, and there will be no keys thrown away in terms of getting into some place, whether it's here or whatever, and having problem-solving conversations and using our influence to as we can to transform the culture into one that is more possible, to create not only infrastructure, but to create the kind of people that we think we are at our best. So we can teach our young people that through their value based on what they see in us. And that is a lot to talk about without talking about it. I know how to talk about it. I think there's other people on this conversation who know how to talk about it as well. But I really think that we should consider going into a problem-solving mode, not just conversationally, but look at infrastructure, look at building, because we have a crisis on our hand. And I understand the importance, as David was doing earlier in this conversation, David Melbranch, there's more than one David, was doing earlier in this conversation, to talk about hope. Hope is a concept. Action can be a fact. We don't want to be depressing and say a bunch of negative stuff because we want to feel good about who we are. I feel good about who I am regardless, because I know who I am. Not negotiable. But I think we need to be real about what David Melbranch mentioned in the very beginning, which gets in the way of us being could be in terms of helping each other, supporting each other, building something for our community, and arriving at cultural cohesion. I'm talking about the disorganization, the fragmentation, those problems. So I'm sorry that we're coming to a close and that we can't talk about what the elements are of that infrastructure right now. But y'all gonna be here tomorrow. Not I'll be right here. I mean, on planet Earth, you know, and we can talk about another meeting at another point to like I said, at least on a trial basis, because even though it might simply look like a conversation we're having, this is historic. We haven't had a conversation like this in a long time. And we need to do it. Is that all right with you, David Milbranch?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I was gonna say, I don't know why you're calling on me for that, but I think, I think it's a good idea to have this as a series. This should be just a one-shot thing. And I'm already thinking of ideas. I was just texting Michael Rice because I got ideas from some of the stuff he was saying. And I'm a firm believer that like something small like this can lead to connections and ideas and collaborations and cohesion, like you're talking about, that can actually work towards some of the goals or some of these solutions that we're kind of batting around here. So I'm excited about this iteration, how historic this was, and what we can do in the future, and having future conversations with ourselves, either the same group or bringing a whole bunch of other people together and having similar conversations, and merging and creating ideas and creating spaces where we can build solutions instead of just talking about them. So I think that's great.
Well, I initiated this to talk about which way to go and to unpack where we are and to talk about working to do some things concretely. And as I think we all know, because we have logical minds, that you can't do it all in one session. But I want our tendencies to sometimes not have faith in our possibilities to be deflected. And on a trial basis, I made some considerations about some things we can do. And I want to reiterate the importance of cultural cohesion, because at the risk of offending people, which is never my intention, no matter what we're doing, no matter how Black it looks, materially or aesthetically, if it doesn't affirm us as Black people, it's very temporary, it is very unstable, and it's potentially very ineffective for Black people. It might get you funding, it might get you on TV, it might get you a cute boyfriend, it might do all kinds of stuff. But the agenda is social justice, social change, giving something hand over to the next generation other than HIV and silence. They deserve better. And we deserve better. And we got the capacity. There's some bad mamma jammas in this box. And there's other people some of them were mentioned already, who are amazing, who may come along if they so choose. Kenyon is amazing. There's another brother who has this project called Beam.
Mhm.
What's his name?
YOLO.
YOLO, yeah.
He's amazing, and his work that he's doing is very important around mental health, because frankly, one of the key struggles that we're having that can defy logic is unresolved mental health and trauma issues that some of us have compensated ourselves into important positions sometimes to make up for other stuff. But we're brilliant regardless. And I'm going to reach out to you all about next steps, because I'm serious as a heart attack at this not being meeting number 99 million that becomes a bunch of talk that doesn't result in anything that changes the trajectory in ways that make us not have to worry so much about health crisis, mental health crisis. Like I told David Johns once, I hope I don't embarrass him by saying this, we're having a conversation about relationships. And I said, we're gonna have to build something that repairs enough Black men so there can be such a big choice for you that you'll have you one, a strong, powerful brother. We have to create spaces that produce those kind of brothers. They're not going, this society is a space that deduces those kind of brothers and it makes them not come into their own. We have to create those spaces to repair them and give them a chance to grow and be vibrant and know who they are. And that's important work. And I like us to do that collectively and talk more about how that's going to be done at some later point. But right now, I want to thank you all for answering the call, for being willing to be here. I know there's others who should be here and hopefully will be here. But I'm highly appreciative that you all decided to come, more than I can actually show here. And I know everybody who's watching in terms of how emotionally uplifting and moving this is for me. The whole idea of talking to this level of brother about culture affirmation and its importance and have you listen and hear me is very exciting to me, because I know that cultural cohesion is a foundational part of our solutions. We don't wind up being inadvertent blackface white supremacists with a Black intentionality. We don't have to do that. There are other options. So I want us to all give closing comments and then we will close.
Well, I just want to say thank you to Cleo and thank you to all my colleagues and my brothers for the space. And, you know, I would say the one closing comment I would give is the importance of mentorship. And, you know, I wouldn't be where I am at all if it wasn't for the many mentors in my life. And so it would be remiss of me to not give a shout out to Dr. Jeffrey King, Mr. Jeffrey King of In the Meantime Men's Group here in Los Angeles. You know, I think one of the things that we can all do as Black men is, if you want to stay connected to your people, stay connected to your history, find you a mentor, get you a mentor of someone that could show you the way, show you the ropes, give you insight and perspective. And that would be my one closing comment of affirmation for us.
Adam?
I'll go next.
All right, I got it. I'm in. So my key takeaway from the conversation is really about having each other's back, affirming each other, and, you know, really supporting each other's work. I was really distracted by a lot of the comments during the conversation. It was really quite alarming that a lot of people have had this experience around lack of support for each other. So that's my key takeaway, and that's kind of an action item for me to kind of figure out how we can better support each other as a community. And thank you for inviting me, Cleo, for allowing me to be on this stage.
You're welcome, Adam.
I mean, I'll go next. Thank you as well, Dr. Cleo, Uncle Cleo, for having me on. I feel privileged to be a part of this group. But I mean, one of the things that I guess I'll leave with is that I think the importance of self-reflection and self-awareness and how we contribute to the problem. I think we talk a lot about what we see and what's outside of us, but very rare do we look inside of us to see how we're contributing to the overall problem in our community. Because I think that we all could take some responsibility in where the state of our community is and helping us to move past.
Real quickly, going forward, there are people who are requesting that you mention the organizations you are part of. So Gabrielle, could you say that real quickly? Adam, say that real quickly. Jamal, say that real quickly. And going forward, people say where you're from so people can know.
Yes, Gabriel Maldonado here from True Evolution. True Evolution, that's TRUEVOLUTION.org. And we're based in Riverside and San Bernardino in Southern California.
I am the president of Black Alphabet. It's an arts organization based in Chicago. We do work in other cities as well. And that is blackalphabet.org.
I am co-founder of the Gentlemen's Foundation / the Gentlemen's Ball, alongside my husband, Juan Smalls, and also co-owner of Virgil's Gala Kitchen here in Atlanta, Georgia.
All right, so oh, my bad, brother.
No, go ahead.
Okay, well, yeah, let me go again. Black Men's Exchange, Amasi, Black Wellness and Cultural Center, People's Community Agricultural Network, and a couple other organizations. But the one thing that I do want to leave with everybody watching this is that if you do want to see progress for our people, and you're worried about a lot of fragmentation or disunity, I will say, first seek the most, Black affirming life within and for yourself, as well as link up with anyone who's like-minded. It doesn't have to be someone who necessarily presents themselves in a way that you envision them being, or they don't have to be the same gender or sexuality as you, but seek another Black like-minded person as well, or people.
Okay, my name is Michael Rice, and I am the CEO of Rice Creative, which is a production company that I own. And if you want more information about films that I'm curating dealing with the LGBT or SGL culture, please reach out to me at Partyboy, that's PARTYBOI, partyboydocumentary.com. And there you can have my contact information, my email, and whatnot.
I'll jump in. I want to say thank you to you, Uncle Cleo. I'm going to use that going forward. Thank you for that, G. Uncle Cleo, thank you for existing in the world. As a Black boy from Inglewood, California, I appreciate you being in the world for literally making it possible for me to claim the space that I occupy. I'm an honor to be in the space with brothers that I admire and respect. I just pray that we all continue to care for ourselves as we do the work that we do. National Black Justice Coalition.
Ashe. Is that everyone?
Appreciate you, Cleo. Appreciate everybody on this call. I love to be in conversation. I love to listen and learn. I just feel like there was so much shared that has me thinking about a lot of different things. And I think that that's important as we are all trying to figure out ways to create paths forward. I lead an organization called Color of Change, which is a racial justice organization, and we are a national organization. And so offices in a lot of places around the country and staff around the country. And but I live in New York.
Thank you. Well, thank you all.
Wait, I need to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I was about to call you out. Yeah.
I want to say, Uncle Cleo, it's a pleasure again to be a part of this. And I actually had a flashback, Cleo, to like 21 or so years ago, 22 years ago, when I first met Cleo, and he was in my apartment. I was a medical resident at the New York Hospital in New York City on 68th in York. And that was around the time that Abner Louima, Amadou Diallo, and all those horrific police shootings and traumas were going on. I had a poster in my apartment, and Cleo came in and he froze when he saw it, because it basically depicted all the Black and Latino men that had been brutalized by police. And so it's interesting, like full circle, we're coming here with, Brother Arbery, who was just gunned down a couple months ago, and having these same conversations again, and kind of how we can move forward. I just wanted to say one thing for everyone who's listening out there. I do think the idea of cultural cohesion is good. And going back to Michael's comment about art, and I think Kashama was mentioning about this in A couple other people were talking about how art is going to be important. I do think it's not mutually exclusive from other disciplines like urban planning, like academia, like medicine, like public health, like law. And so I think if we can find a way to merge the artwork into these fields to get education to folks. And I think the best example that I've seen done recently was the documentary by Ava DuVernay, The 13th, which I don't think a lot of people would look at that and say, well, she's trying to educate white people. And I didn't think of that at all. I think there was many more Black people that were not aware of what the 13th Amendment did. And so I was happy that she saw that. But I think in the fields of like, because I'm biased because I'm an associate professor at Morehouse School of Medicine, and I work with HIV, I do sexual health, I do student health all the time. And I'm thinking about some of the inequities, and I'm thinking about artistic ways that we can bring that to the forefront. Because instead of writing articles or publishing, presenting at a conference, or doing some of these traditional venues, to find artistic ways, like Michael said, everybody has a phone. So if you can reach that number of people and tell people, educate people about what's really going on and affirm Black people, then you can actually have ripple effects. Instead of trying to create a big old thing, you plant seeds everywhere and people will get that. And I do think, bringing this back to you, Cleo, so you can wrap us up, but that's what Cleo has done. And I know probably for a lot of brothers on this call, a lot of brothers in the world, and a lot of sisters, a lot of gender nonconforming folks all over the planet, you have planted seeds in our minds. And I look at the mentorship that I've received from you. I look at the mentorship from John Peterson, from brothers like Robert Fullalove in New York. And without kind of people dropping knowledge in my brain and kind of unplugging me, going back to Rashad saying the matrix, like unplugging me from the matrix and making me see some things, I wouldn't have grown and couldn't have done some of the work that I do now. So I think it's about us disseminating that further so that the ripples go further moving forward. And we can combine our disciplines to do that. But I think art is a particularly powerful tool to use in these times.
And I just want to say really quick, thank you for that, David. And I just want to say really quick, thank you so much, Dr. Cleo. How I met Dr. Cleo was actually, I saw him on the Roland Martin show, and he was talking about the death of Jamel Moore and the Ed Buck situation. And many months later, I decided to call him to ask if I could use a clip of him to be featured in the Party Boy documentary, where he was talking about the Jamel Moore and Ed Buck story that was happening in LA. And from there, Party Boy's been taken off, but I want to thank you, Dr. Cleo, also too, when I had my LA screening at the Pan-African Film Festival a film festival, that you came out and you supported the project. So once again, I just want to say, I really appreciate and value you. Thank you. And I want to say to all the brothers on the panel, this is the second time I've had the opportunity of doing something like this within the past month. And if I don't know everyone, but I'm getting to know you through this Zoom. And I just want to say, you can reach me on my social media, or I can give my phone number, and Dr. Cleo has my information, but any of you guys are welcome to call me to talk about anything, or we can plan something. So don't ever hesitate, because I'm just sitting here at the house in quarantine.
Ashe. Well, I have had the pleasure of being in the presence of everybody on this Zoom, in the Zoom event. And what I think you all have in common is heart. There's a lot of heart, a lot of caring among you. And I saw that, and I see that, and that attracted me to you, because I could see your decency sometimes in the midst of a lot of noise. I could still see, I mean, David is right. When I first met him and I walked into his home and I saw how much damn he gave, how he gave a damn, and his house reflected that. I was very moved by him. I mean, he talks about me being a mentor, et cetera, but all of you bring something organic in terms of who you are and who you are at your core, which I appreciate. And that's one of the things that attracted me and inspired me to invite you to this particular interaction. But I want to say this, or I should say, and I want to say this. There's an article supposedly about me that was in the Huffington Post. I forgot what year the article came out. You can Google it and see it. But it refers to me as being dangerous. It literally has in the title, Cleo Monago, the most dangerous Black man. And if we had more time, I would ask you to interpret what dangerous was meaning. What I'm suggesting you do anyway, because the time is, go read the article for yourself. But I've been called dangerous or those kind of terms were used toward me throughout my career because I'm pro-Black and I'm Black affirming. And we've been trained to think that the opposite of pro-Black is anti-white, when indeed the opposite of pro-Black is anti-Black. And my goal in my life has been to deflect the tendency within Black people, because of the influence of white supremacist norms and coercion, that we unlearn being anti-Black and become pro-Black, because everybody else is pro their own people. And it's a natural progression to care about your people and look out for them as a part of your way of being. But in our case in particular, there's been a lot of disruption of our capacity, divide and conquer, some of the things that we've already talked about in terms of some of the treatments and behaviors we have with each other that has gotten in the way of us coalescing and being cohesive. Was my perspective, both rigorously evaluated and personally experienced in terms of strategy, that cultural competency, cultural affirmation, and cultural cohesion are central to a problem solving for us and behavior change for us. The behavior that we described and that Rashad described very early in this conversation, that's problematic, that gets in the way of us working together. We have to change that behavior so we can win in other ways. So I want to become less abstract at another time and talk about, along with whatever you raise, some real strategies that in our work that we've done that Kashama has been a witness to some extent, David Melbus has been a witness to, and others, the power of cultural cohesion, cultural affirmation, and unlearning anti-Black norms and white supremacy mythological norms. That's going to help us to win better or more at making sure our community is safer and less at risk for self-destruction and destruction toward each other. And just to borrow some of the sentiments of David Melbranch in terms of hope, I have hope. I'm very optimistic because I've seen with my own eyes the power of a good strategy. So as long as I have that information and am a witness to the power of it, I feel good because I know there's always potential for us to be better and better in terms of our possibilities. So that's enough of me being the uncle and rattling off to my nephews. But thank you so much. I am profoundly appreciative, but not just for me, but for the intention of this conversation, which is to move us to a place of more power, more affirmation, and more collective success, and more tools to make it a better life experience for us and the rest of Black people. Because we all work for Black folks across the spectrum, but we have some unique needs that we have to address and that we have been addressing. Again, I'm appreciative. Get some rest, love yourself, look for some more communication from me, and look for an invite to another conversation that's going to be strategy-based. Good night. Love Black people. Be good to yourself. Thank you.